Margaret Pole, the last Plantagenet. The woman standing before the executioner is not young. That matters. History loves young queens, beautiful queens, dangerous queens, women burning brightly enough to look almost mythological before tragedy consumes them. But Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, feels different, older, quieter, wrapped not in scandal, but in memory. Because when you look at Margaret Pole, you are looking at the ghost of a dead dynasty still walking through Tudor England, and ghosts make insecure kings nervous, especially kings like Henry VIII. You feel it immediately when stepping into her world. This is not the shining beginning of the Tudors anymore. The court of Hampton Court Palace gleams with gold and velvet, but underneath the luxury, something paranoid has started spreading. Executions, religious fractures, whispers turning fatal overnight. Because Henry VIII's England is becoming a kingdom ruled increasingly through fear, and Margaret Pole survives inside it, carrying something extraordinarily dangerous, a better claim to the throne than many Tudors. That's the terrifying irony. Margaret does not spend her life chasing power. Power keeps hunting her. You see it in her bloodline immediately. She is the daughter of George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence, brother to kings during the violent collapse of the House of Plantagenet. The Plantagenets once ruled England completely. Then came civil war. The Wars of the Roses tore noble families apart so brutally that entire bloodlines vanished into execution blocks and battlefields. And from that chaos, the Tudors rise. But dynasties built from civil war never fully stop fearing the old blood underneath them. That's what Margaret represents. Survival. A living reminder that the Plantagenets did not disappear entirely. You feel it in her childhood first. Loss everywhere. Her father executed, her family shattered. Relatives disappearing into prisons, exile or graves, depending on which king controls England that year. Margaret learns young what royal blood actually means. Not safety, danger. Because in unstable monarchies, bloodlines become weapons. Still, against all odds, she survives. That alone makes her remarkable. You see her slowly rebuilding a life under the early Tudor court, careful, measured, never reaching too openly for influence. And eventually, she rises again. Not as queen, something subtler, trusted noblewoman, mother, advisor, a woman navigating one of the deadliest courts in English history through intelligence and restraint. That restraint becomes her armor, especially once Catherine of Aragon enters the story. Margaret serves Catherine closely, and suddenly you can feel another dangerous tension forming beneath the surface of England, because Catherine represents old Catholic Europe, duty, tradition, legitimacy, and Margaret Pole, with her ancient Plantagenet blood, fits naturally beside her. Too naturally, perhaps. You can almost feel the future disaster approaching long before anyone speaks it aloud. Because Henry VIII is changing. At first slowly, then all at once. The king who once looked powerful and charismatic begins transforming into something harder, more suspicious, more volatile, more obsessed with loyalty. And when kings become frightened, people with dangerous bloodlines stop being trusted for long. That's where Margaret's story tightens like a noose. Not because she openly rebels, not because she raises armies, because she remains connected to too many people Henry eventually fears. Especially her son, Reginald Pole, brilliant, religious, unwilling to support Henry's break from the Catholic Church. And suddenly Margaret's family becomes politically radioactive. You feel the atmosphere around her darkening now. Friends becoming cautious, court conversations stopping when she enters rooms. The terrifying realization spreading that proximity to the wrong beliefs can become treason overnight. Because Tudor England is no longer merely political. Now it is ideological. And ideological governments rarely tolerate divided loyalty peacefully, especially from women connected to rival bloodlines, especially women who survive too long. That's what makes Margaret Pole haunting. She feels less like a rebel, and more like history refusing to die quietly. A Plantagenet grandmother walking calmly through a Tudor world that desperately wants the past erased. And Henry VIII, for all his power, cannot fully relax while she remains alive, because somewhere deep inside paranoid kings lives the same fear. That blood remembers. Right as loyalty, religion and royal paranoia begin collapsing together around Margaret Pole. Because next, Henry VIII decides that one old woman may still be dangerous enough to destroy.
The arrest happens quietly. That's how Tudor terror works by now. Not dramatic armies crashing through castle gates, paper, signatures, accusations, a knock at the door that changes your life before sunrise. And by the time Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, realizes how serious the danger has become, the machine around Henry VIII is already moving, fast, because Henry no longer thinks like a king protecting stability. He thinks like a man haunted constantly by betrayal. You feel it everywhere in England now. Monasteries destroyed, Catholic loyalties hunted, friends turning into informants overnight. And at the center of Henry's paranoia sits one terrifying truth. Margaret Pole's son Reginald Pole has openly condemned him, not quietly, publicly. Reginald calls Henry's religious break illegitimate, questions his authority, refuses submission even while safely outside England, and Henry takes it personally. That's the dangerous thing about Tudor politics. The king does not separate disagreement from betrayal, especially not later in life, especially not after years of conspiracies, broken marriages, and religious war tearing through his court. So suddenly, but Margaret Pole transforms from respected noblewoman into something much more dangerous, the mother of a traitor. You can almost feel the emotional collapse happening around her, servants becoming distant, allies disappearing carefully, doors closing softly once she walks past. Because everyone in England understands something horrifying by now. When Henry VIII truly turns against someone, the outcome is rarely survival. Still, Margaret probably believes her age might protect her. And honestly, it should have. She is elderly, politically restrained, not leading rebellions or commanding armies. But tyrannies do not calm down with age. They escalate, especially when fear takes over leadership completely. Then comes the evidence, and this part feels almost surreal. A tunic allegedly discovered in her household embroidered with symbols tied to rebellion against Henry. Historians still debate it fiercely. Was it real, planted, exaggerated intentionally? The deeper you look into Tudor prosecutions, the more the truth begins slipping sideways. Because once governments decide someone is dangerous, evidence often becomes secondary. You feel that terrifying shift immediately. Margaret is arrested, dragged away, not as a grandmother or noblewoman, but as a threat to the crown. And then the Tower, the dreaded Tower of London, cold stone, dark corridors, the same place that swallowed countless rivals before her. And suddenly, Margaret Pole joins the long procession of people destroyed by Tudor paranoia. You can almost feel the cruelty of it. A woman who survived the Wars of the Roses, survived dynastic collapse, survived decades of court politics, only to be destroyed by the very dynasty that once spared her. That's the emotional brutality of Henry VIII's reign late in life. No amount of past loyalty guarantees future safety. Not anymore. The imprisonment drags on, months becoming years. Margaret isolated inside the Tower while England transforms outside without her. And yet, even imprisoned, she remains dangerous symbolically, because she is still Plantagenet, still connected to England's old royal blood, still a reminder that Tudor power rests on foundations built through war and fear. That's why Henry cannot simply ignore her. And eventually, the order comes. Execution. You feel the horror of it immediately because by now Margaret is nearly 70. 70. An old woman condemned by one of the most powerful kings in Europe. And even the people carrying out the sentence seem unsettled by it. The execution itself becomes nightmare-like in historical memory, chaotic, botched, almost medieval in its brutality. Some stories say Margaret refused to place her head willingly on the block, that she ran, that the executioner chased her in panic. Whether every detail is true almost becomes irrelevant, because the legend survives for a reason. The death feels symbolic, not simply of Margaret Pole, but of the final destruction of the Plantagenet line itself. That's why history calls her the last Plantagenet. And honestly, it fits, because her death feels like Henry VIII trying to execute memory itself, trying to erase every lingering shadow of the dynasties that came before him. But history rarely works that way. The more violently rulers try to erase people, the more unforgettable those people often become. You feel it in Margaret's legacy afterward. To Catholics, she becomes almost martyr-like. To Tudor historians, politically dangerous. To later generations, a haunting victim of paranoia wrapped in royal silk. And perhaps that's the most chilling part of all. Margaret Pole never truly behaves like a rebel queen. She behaves like a survivor. And sometimes, in paranoid kingdoms, survival itself becomes suspicious. So we leave her here, not dazzling like Anne Boleyn, not conquering like Boudica, but standing at the bloody intersection of dynasty, religion and fear, where old royal blood finally met Tudor terror. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the slow, suffocating paranoia of Henry VIII's England, don't stop here. There are more women like her. Women history tried to erase quietly, only for their ghosts to outlive the kings who destroyed them. Subscribe and come back for the next chapter. Next time, we step into a queen whose beauty became legendary and whose revenge became even more famous. Stay dangerous, stay loud, and never let them hold the pen.